Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I reached out to all of the candidates for Board of Education in Zone 2 after their two debates and after our initial interviews and offered a follow-up because there were so many issues that were coming out after the debates and after a lot of the questions and more things got dug up that I thought each person should have an opportunity to kind of address those. Greg Marvel reached out to me and said he'd like to do that, and so I had him on today. The offer still stands, obviously, with Shelly and Priscilla, so if they are interested, they can always come and do it as well. Without further ado, the man, the myth, the legend, Greg Marvel.
I can hear you.
I can hear you too, Greg. Thanks for coming. It's a good time. So the ballots are out.
The ballots are out.
The ballots are out. And where people are sending them in already.
Good. Hopefully with my name checked.
Hopefully, sir. Hopefully.
We'll
so
see.
I reached out to all the candidates
Right.
in Zone 2. I unfortunately am constrained by time, but for the specifically Zone 2, that's my voting district. I reached out to all the candidates and offered this follow-up conversation, and we're going to try to make it shorter today. But the idea is, hey, look, there's so much that has happened over the last few weeks, including the forums, including additional questions, including additional votes, and I felt instead of doing a debate-style conversation where one person says one thing and somebody else says something, we just, again, allow you a little bit of space to say, hey, look, these are the kind of responses for things, and these are the things to think about. So thank you for taking me up on it.
Yeah, I would love to have had my fellow candidates here because I think it's important that the voters hear from each candidate what position they have on what are incredibly important challenges the district is facing and the different perspectives on how we're going to face that challenge. Because I suspect I have far different views than some of the other candidates on some fairly major
Let's get into
questions
it.
of the day.
Let's dive in.
Let's do it.
What are the positions that you feel are far different?
Well, let's take, for example, one of the candidates supported by the teachers union took a position that indicated that she believed we need to get rid of our school resource officers. And I know that's a position that CTA at the state level has taken that position as well, that part of the defund the police movement that's going on in the country, and they harped on that. And so one of the candidates represented by the teachers union said that. I adamantly oppose that. I think it's a huge, massive error. I think it puts politics in place of safety. You can believe that there needs to be police reform. I think most people would say there probably does need to be police reform. But does that delve down to the level of you then leave our kids vulnerable to attack from bad people? Columbine, which was a horrible tragedy, is identical socioeconomically. It's basically our twin out in Colorado. And it's the San Ramon Valley just with a different zip code. And kids decided that they wanted to go in and shoot up the school and kill a bunch of their fellow students. Horrible tragedy. We have school resource officers at our high schools in large part because of that. That's not the only thing they do. They're an integral part of the staff at each of our high schools. They've been integrated into the staff. They serve a counseling role. They do. Do they serve a law enforcement role? Absolutely, they do. Sadly, we have some students who believe that that's a good place to deal drugs on campus, as an example.
Right. That's not something that I've heard a lot of people talk about. Like that, drugs on campus, especially with the different delivery methods. It could be vaping. It could be all kinds. It's not as simple as like, oh, do you have a bag full of marijuana? These could be small cartridges that they pop into.
We find it's sadly there's all kinds. So I mean,
Right.
it's not just drugs, but it's also fighting.
Sure.
You know, you have kids that sometimes they think fists are the way to solve the problem. School resource officers there, counsel them. Very rarely do we ever have kids taken off in handcuffs. It's unheard of. It just never happens. So they're more of a counseling role. But do I believe as a school board member that we need to leave our campuses vulnerable to bad people, whether it's some student who's going crazy or some adult I was in schools, a school administrator, when the crazy guy in Stockton went up and shot up an elementary school, if you remember, with the assault rifle quite a number of years ago. Incredible tragedy. I need to have a police officer there with a gun strapped to his side, not 10 minutes or 15 minutes from now. I need him there now. I want him seconds away from the problem. Not because I think something's going to happen every day. Very often you take precautions not because of what is, but what if. And so if a bad person manages to get on one of our campuses, do I need somebody there like that? And the answer is absolutely. So I adamantly oppose getting rid of school resource officers. There have been a number of requests from, it got a lot of interest in the community. A number of parents submitted emails to me requesting that the issue be placed on the board agenda under the education code. Any matter within the purview of the district, members of the public can request to have the item placed on the agenda for discussion or a vote. And I'm honoring that. We're going to be doing that. Not at this meeting Tuesday night, which is what is tomorrow? 6th? 7th? 6th? I can't remember what day it is.
I don't know what day it is
Whatever
either.
Tuesday is. The following meeting. So the one in the latter part of October.
Gotcha.
That's going to be on the agenda. I gave the superintendent a little time to prepare stats and facts and everything to present to the board, but the request from at least 3 separate parents asked to have the issue placed on the agenda. And I think in large part because of the union-backed candidate who said that if it was, she was, one of the things she tried to do if she got on the board was to eliminate school resource officers. So I don't think anybody thought, frankly, that issue would come up, but now that it has, I think it's fair to ask the board what's their position on it.
Right.
So you know my position. Absolutely, if I have my vote, if I have my say, school resource officers will remain on all of our high school campuses.
Right.
Full-time, by the way. They're full-time.
That issue in general is so difficult because you don't want to invalidate somebody's feelings, right? The argument is very clear. Hey, look, having a school resource officer there with some degree of firearm, it does not make every student feel better because they get worried or they may have been profiled in the past, and
Right.
that's not untrue. I'm sure there are students
Absolutely.
that feel that way, and that's a terrible thing. Right. I also think, though, that you have to ask, okay, well, how many students and how many parents feel better knowing this, right? Like, how many students do you ask at San Ramon Valley or Cal High or whatever? Like, hey, if we had a police officer here that you all knew and participated in rallies and you could go up and talk to him at any point, would you feel better or worse knowing he's here, right? And again, I'm sure some would say, I don't really like that, but from a parent standpoint, right? From my standpoint, when Green Valley Elementary was talking about putting gates in, I was not a huge fan of a closed campus, but my wife, it really mattered to her, and she was saying, look, this is a good thing. And I said, look, what are the odds? What are the odds? I mean, one teacher we talked to was like, I've been here 20 or 30 years, whatever she said. We've never had an incident. And I told that to my wife because I had this conversation in private with the teacher. And my wife said, yes, I understand. But it only takes one. And then you're going to feel really bad if you don't have those fences.
Right.
up.
And I'm on your wife's side on that debate because I've been pushing for a number of years now for us to devote money every year to building up, harden our schools to make sure that it's more difficult. Nothing is ever 100% safe. If a bad person wants to get on campus, they will probably try to find a way to do it. What you want to do is delay. You want to delay them as long as possible until help arrives. We do not have school resource officers at all of our campuses.
Right.
We have them at basically the high schools full time, and then they do some visitations at the middle schools.
Right.
But so we can't have we can't have a police officer at every site. It's not
Right.
It's not feasible.
Right.
But what we can do is harden the campuses to ensure they're as safe as possible. So yeah, not everybody can just walk in and start wandering the halls and opening up doors into classrooms.
Right.
We try to create some sort of safeguards in that area.
Right.
So we have a list of the areas that need to be fixed. Did we go public with that list? no, we're not going public. We're not letting the bad guys know what our plans are. But bottom line is we are fixing the campuses each year, adding more and more things to make them safer. We've had people analyzing them to say where the weak spots are, so those weak spots could be closed. So we're doing that. But all of that is meaningless if ultimately you don't have school resource officers on campus. They're not the only place that school shootings and massacres occur, sadly, but it's the majority of times. So you put your resources where you have even though they're highly unlikely, if something bad happens, where's the most likely place for it to happen? It's at the high schools.
Right. I remember a political cartoon I saw a couple years back, and it was a house with a lawn sign in front of it. It says, "I believe in the Second Amendment." And then it had an arrow going to the side that said, "But my neighbor doesn't." The whole emphasis is essentially, look,
right.
You want our schools to be a less favorable target for psychopaths, right? You want our children to be protected. You want people that would do harm to them, genuine harm to them, to feel like there's a risk. There's a real risk going onto that campus.
Right.
And again, I'm not trying to take anything away from people who don't feel good about police officers, but there's a lot of the town councilmen have talked about trying to build better bonds with young people in the police department, to build those relationships. So
and that's one of the ways the school resource officers do it. First of all, they're not just guys that came off the beat. They've been trained. They go through a lot of training on how to be a school resource officer, how to interact effectively with young people, and how to be basically a police officer full-time in the halls of a school.
Right.
And it's different than walking the beat or being in a car going up and down San Ramon Valley Boulevard or Sycamore Valley or whatever.
Right.
So we just throw people into the mix. Okay, yeah, you're the school resource officer today. They actually get formalized training on how to be it. And then the problem that's occurred in some other districts is that doesn't happen. They just take somebody who's been busy in the gang detail, in some poor neighborhood, and now suddenly the school resource officer the next day at a school, and they only know one way of dealing with problems, and that isn't the way you deal with it as a school resource officer. There's all kinds of techniques of how to de-escalate problems with two kids that are ready to go each other's throats. How do you de-escalate so they don't end up hurting each other? They're part of our counseling staff, and they do a phenomenal job every single day. And we get subsidized support from the town of Danville and the city of San Ramon. So shout out to our fellow elected officials in those two cities who have assisted us by making sure that they're helping to subsidize the cost of those officers in our schools. Right. And thank you. And that's not true in every district, by the way. We have that kind of a close working relationship. I spent the last 20 years helping to build bonds with my fellow elected officials so that I can call the mayors and the councilmen. I can call the county board of supervisors if I need to try to advocate for what's best for schools. And we've gotten, frankly, millions of dollars a year in this valley, not just with our school resource officers, but our school buses and the maintenance of our fields and our grounds because of that close working relationship that we've developed with other public agencies here in the valley. And that is not the case in many, many school districts in California. Usually they're at odds. They're about something.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Another question. One of the big things that people have been talking about that's a distinction between you and other candidates is they were saying, look, the union is not backing Greg, right? The union might be backing these other people. And when you try to dig into the question of, okay, well, where does that come from, right? Why is the union backing this person versus that person, and where does that spring up? A lot of people say, hey, Greg just won't do. Greg has had to make some hard decisions. The unions are not happy about it. And the last biggest thing, it appears, was the extended, prolonged negotiation with the raises from 2019 to 2020, and then, of course, the retroactive pay for the superintendent. What, if I may ask, what was the union asking for that they wanted that you weren't prepared to give them?
It was the equivalent of about $40 million in additional revenue This is according to our CFO, our Chief Financial Officer, that they wanted. We simply didn't have $40 million.
What were you offering them?
We were offering a 2.5% raise. We were offering increase in health and welfare benefit premiums being picked up. We were continuing to offer that they would continue to have we had set aside $9.6 million. I'm doing the math, see if I've got that right. I believe, I believe it was $9.6 million that could be spent out over 3 years on reducing workload for counselors, for school psychologists, for a variety of different positions represented by the teachers union, because we recognize that yes, we're basically making their jobs easier by devoting this money, but we're also providing more specialized, individualized service to kids. So it was a win-win for everybody. But there was a finite amount of money available. When you added up all the things that they wanted, it was approximately $40 million, and we simply could not afford that. It just wasn't going to happen. So we would have exhausted all of our reserves, and we would have been in a negative number. And the way school finance works in California is the district, in order we can agree to anything we want, absolutely anything. We could agree to every teacher's going to make $1 million a year and have free health insurance for life, and we could absolutely agree to that, until the agreement then went to the county board of the county superintendent's office, and they, by state law, they have to review our settlement, and then they have to sign off on it that it is something we can financially afford.
So you would have had an external audit. So even if you had agreed, say, to whatever it was the union was asking for, if you said, okay, we will do this, no problem, Greg comes out looking squeaky clean, then you send that off, the independent audit in the county would not have accepted the settlement.
Oh, they sent us a letter that said, no, nice try, but no, we're not going to agree to it. I have never had that happen in my career, both as a board member and then when I was a executive, running schools and college systems. I've never had somebody come and say, we won't approve something. And we never agreed to it because we knew that. Just because you want it doesn't mean you can afford it. So I would love to have Ken Baring's house at the top of Blackhawk. Could I afford that? No.
Right.
I couldn't afford if it was gifted to me when you to maintain it, and then the gift tax. So there's a lot of things I'd love, but I can't have it. And the same goes ultimately for negotiations with the unions. They have a role to play, and an absolute valid role to play, which is to try to get as many chips from our side of the table onto their side. But ultimately, if they want more chips than we have, or they want so many chips that we're unable to then continue the normal ongoing delivery of service to kids, then we have to say no. And not only did we say no, but the county actually had the extraordinary step of coming to the school board meeting and announcing in public and reading the letter that they had written to me as the board president, saying, no, you cannot give 1 cent more than what you have already offered.
So the county, I'm sorry, I misunderstood this. I thought you said they would have sent you a letter. The county actually reviewed
They reviewed what was on the table from the union.
Sure.
And then let us know, kind of as a preemptive strike, for lack of a better term. They let us know, you better not agree to what is wanted because you cannot afford it, and we will not sign off on it.
So the county literally said, Greg, I don't even care what you want to do. If you give 1 cent more than what's on the table right now, or what you're offering, we will not approve of it, and you guys will be back here at the drawing board anyway.
That's correct. As Mount Diablo was. They agreed to a settlement that the county rejected with their teachers union, and so we're not going to be in that situation. So I always make decisions based on what's best for kids, what's best for the taxpayers, what's best for the parents, and I'm never going to agree to something that puts the district into financial ruin. Not going to happen. Not on my watch, at least. I'm not going to vote for it. I don't get 5 votes. I get 1. But my fellow board members have usually agreed with me on that. I've had various board members I've worked with over the years. Sometimes we'd have knockdown, drag-out fights. But generally, this board, as it's currently composed, sees eye to eye on we're not going to put the district into ruin to avoid a strike. We're not going to do that. If people want to strike, they can strike. And the end result is a strike doesn't generate more money. We can't go into the back room and put a bunch of 20s on a copy machine, and print out a bunch of 20s on a color copier. Not happening. So
Well,
the
if we
money
could,
is the
I
money
think
is
you
the
and
money.
I think if we could do that, you and I would be living in much larger houses.
Much larger houses. Well, yeah, it's called prison.
That's actually a fair point.
The reason they call it the big house.
Yeah,
I just thought
right.
I'd point that out.
Damn, that's good. I hadn't thought of that.
So the bottom line is the money is the money. Unfortunately, the problem we had is the union believed that our numbers were wrong, that we were somehow hiding all this money, and I've said it publicly before to the CFO and to the superintendent. If this board finds out that you're hiding money, you're fired. Period. So we're honest. We're upfront. Here's the money. What's the best way to spend it that has the best benefit for kids? And some of that, obviously, one of the best benefits is making sure you have a competitive workforce. That's why we pay such high salaries to our teachers and to other employees in this district, because we recognize that if we're at the bottom of the labor market, you won't get the best teachers, because the best teachers are going to flock to those districts that pay higher wages. Why wouldn't they? That's what you do. You don't, most people go out to jobs because they need to bring in money. So if we can pay better than another district, then we have a better chance of getting those bright, highly qualified, energetic, wonderful teachers that we've come to expect in this district. You don't get it by being at the bottom of the market. But you also don't get it by going bankrupt, because when you go bankrupt, people get laid off. So those wonderful teachers you just hired in the last few years, they're out the door. So one of the things that I've also believed strongly is that we need to maintain an adequate reserve. We need to people that we just leaving money there just to sit. Yes, because you don't know what's going to happen. Just like, I don't know, just thinking out loud here, COVID. Did anybody know this time last year that we would be having COVID hitting us in March? Did anybody think that the state, which had a $10 or $12 billion surplus, would suddenly be $54 billion in the red? No.
It seems so impossible, too. I mean, when you think about it, the nature of an unpredictable event is that it's literally unpredictable. But for some reason, people are always surprised by it. And again, with COVID, it's like, well, we didn't see this coming. Of course you didn't see it coming. Nobody saw it coming, right? And that's, again, not that I had anything to do with your planning, but in my own personal life, it's like, that's why we save for the unknown. And you're always surprised when the unknown happens, especially when it turns so negative. But they're hopefully in this experience, younger people and my generation will take a really hard look at, hey, look, we really have no idea when an earthquake is coming, when a fire is coming, when a disease is coming, and hopefully we'll be better prepared.
So you have to have enough. So my issue with the union, my fight, quote unquote, with the union was I cannot give you that which we do not have. If we honor your request, the county won't honor it. And if they somehow failed to note that 2 and 2 wasn't 8, and the money started to run out, we'd be taken over by the county, which will not serve anybody any good. So, and we'd be laying a bunch of people off. Hundreds of teachers would have to get laid off. Why would we do that? So let's give you what we can afford, which was about $8 million. And again, we look at things by, we look at things for the whole district. So we don't say, well, this group's more important than that group, so we're going to give you more money. No, we treat everybody the same. We've done that for a very, very, very long time. As long as I've been on the board, and I suspect even before that. It's pretty common for most employers to not treat one group different than another. We try to treat everybody that, because when, in the good times, if you're treating everybody the same, in the bad times, everybody wants to be treated the same as well. Well, let's take it all out on this employee group. So you're all getting laid off, but everybody else is going to stay employed. Well, no, we try to even out the pain, and we try to even out the benefit, if you will. So
Right.
it was about $8 million that we were willing to give, and that's what it was going to cost for the raises for all the bargain units. And at one point they were saying they were going to strike if they didn't get what they wanted, which I find to be a real tragedy. So I vehemently came out against a strike. I think it's wrong. I think if adults in the room can get their heads together and work out what's best for kids, somehow I don't think a strike will be on the table. But the union felt that they needed to make a point, and they were going to make a point by striking against the kids. And the end result is, as I said to them, you're not going to get 1 cent more if you strike than what we offered you already, because the county has told us what our parameters are. The county has told us what we're able to provide, and they will not authorize anything more. So I can't tell you not to strike. You legally can if you've gone through all the steps that the law says you have to go through, with negotiations and then declaring impasse, and then you bring in a state mediator, and then the mediator, if they're unable to reach a settlement, then the mediator turns it over to fact-finding. You have a panel, a 3-member panel that looks at all the evidence and the information and comes back with recommendations. And at that point, the district can choose to implement the recommendations or implement its last, best, and final offer to the union. And at that point, the union has a legal right to strike.
Gotcha.
So, but I have a problem with anybody who holds kids hostage, because that's in effect, when you strike kids, that's what you're doing.
Right.
So the adults need to get their heads together and figure out how to resolve the problem, not hold kids hostage. When you're taking away a vital element of a child's future, which is receiving a quality education, because you're mad at the other adults in the room, I can't support that. And I won't support that. And I'm a strong union advocate. I was a union officer, I was a union member, a union officer in a school employees union. I was executive vice president of my union. I was a labor rep and a staff member to a school employees union here in the state for 6 years. So, I mean, it's not like I'm not union. I get it. I'm a pro-union person. But I also believe that you don't hurt kids to make a point.
Right.
And that's what a strike does.
Right.
And the end result is, hey, if we'd been hoarding $40 million, then shame on us. But we weren't. The county had told us what we had available.
Gotcha.
We just had a disagreement with our union about whether that was true or not. And I believe our financial staff, I believe our CFO, I believe our county superintendent and her staff that reviewed our records. I believe the state because they also review our records, and I believe our outside auditors. We pay an outside independent auditing firm to look at our numbers and see if they're accurate. So we have 5 different levels of review, and yet the teachers union unfortunately they didn't believe those numbers.
Gotcha.
So the end result is sanity prevailed. They got the raise we'd offered them back in September, and this was in March, back in September, and we live another day. The end result is I could not grant them what they wanted, and they never said to me why they didn't support me, for re-election. They just said we're going in another direction. But you can speculate, and my speculation is I wouldn't give them the raise they wanted, and they're probably not happy with my position on going back.
Gotcha.
Because CTA has made it very clear that they don't want to go back unless there's no COVID infection anywhere, and there's a vaccine. Well, I believe that you cannot ultimately protect from 100% of the things that are out there. You absolutely don't want to just allow people to go back willy-nilly the way it was pre-COVID. I think those days are over, at least for the foreseeable future. What we have to do is we have to provide reasonable levels of protection from a safety perspective, from a health perspective, social distancing, the masks, all the things that the county and the CDE and the state have indicated that we need to do. So
a quick question before we dive down here, because I did want to hit that. Speaking of the retroactive raise,
oh, yes.
Another major philosophical difference that you have with other candidates is the retroactive raise that was given to the superintendent. And this
Right.
was one of the first things that I heard, and it's stayed in the conversation. Now, again, I understand the teachers were bargaining for this retroactive raise, and you have made it very clear, hey, look, we're going to treat everybody the same. The executives are unrepresented. They don't have a union. When the teachers get a raise, the executives get a raise. They get the exact same raise, no more, no less. And we're talking percentages. And people always come out and say, yes, but that's percentages. The superintendent makes so much more. Now, the retroactive raise that you gave, what was the actual dollar amount that he got in a raise that everybody has been very upset about?
Well, what was flying around social media, perpetuated by some people, sadly, in the union, because I have screen posts of what was being said, but the numbers that were bandied around was management got $800,000 in raises. No. That included a bunch of classified employees, non-teaching employees raises, custodians, groundskeepers, bus drivers, secretaries, things like that. No, the superintendent's raise was around a little over $7,000
The retroactive raise that
Yes.
you gave along with the teachers.
to everybody else. Why did we do that? Well, yes, we have the long-standing tradition of treating everybody the same. So the other issue is we had a contract with the superintendent. He has an employment contract, as all at-will employees do. By law, they have to be given an employment contract.
Sure.
So he has an employment contract. So he doesn't have tenure, in other words. Whereas teachers get tenure after 18 months, here the at-will employees at the exec level get a contract.
Gotcha.
So that contract said that he's going to be treated just like everybody else. The management gets a raise, he gets a raise, and if it's retroactive, it's retroactive. So in this case, it was. It didn't have to be retroactive. So we could have told the teachers, we're going to give you, this raise this year, but it's not retroactive. I doubt if they would have agreed with that. They probably wouldn't have been too happy. But the agreement with them was it would be retroactive to July 1. So it was retroactive to July 1 for everybody.
So the superintendent's
someone-
contract stipulated that he got, if the teachers or management got a retroactive raise, he got the same retroactive raise. That was the contract that
treated
everybody
like
agreed to.
everybody else. Now, what's different about the current superintendent is I modified the contract, and what it says is not just he's going to get the raise everybody else gets. It now says he's going to take a decrease if other people take a decrease. Because knowing what could be coming with the state's problems in 21-22, it's very possible we'll have to have hard discussions about what we're going to do about compensation. When 90% of your budget is people, and the state may very well cut us $40 to $50 million, where are you going to get that money from? So I think everything ought to be on the table. And that would include compensation for everybody.
Everybody. So
Everybody.
when everybody gets a raise, he got a $7,000 raise.
Equivalent,
And
right.
now the contract says, guess what? If everybody takes a pay decrease, you're taking a pay decrease too.
As well. That's right.
Okay.
The old contracts didn't say that because,
Gotcha.
frankly, we hadn't given anybody a decrease. Even in the Great Recession, we didn't give anybody decreases. We kept giving step and column increases to all of our classified and our teachers, our certificated employees. They all got step increases, salary schedules, because we have a salary schedule. Oh, you're in year 3, you get a step increase. You're in year 5, you get a step increase.
Gotcha.
That kind of stuff. So we did that. But actually, the kind of cuts we're expecting to see in 21-22 are substantially larger than we got during the Great Recession.
Gotcha.
So I think everything needs to be on the table. So in keeping with that, we modified the contract to indicate that there was a provision in there for reduction in salary. So the bottom line is we didn't treat him any different than anybody else. Yet was it a percentage increase he got? Absolutely. If you don't give percentage increases, then ultimately this salary delta, the difference between a rank and file employee and a principal, as an example, will get lower and lower and lower. And pretty soon, there's not much difference between what you pay a teacher and what you pay the principal who oversees, 100 classrooms at a high school, as an example. So you have, and then this, as you keep going up the food chain, of course that applies. So I saw there were rumors out there in social media that employees were getting, made 20 times less than the superintendent. The teachers are just so incredibly underpaid compared to the superintendent. Well, everybody's in the top 10%. We try to keep everybody. It's our goal to be in the top 10% in the labor market in the Bay Area, and we are, including our teachers. A teacher makes between 122, that's total comp, salaries and benefits, 122 to 100, and with some stipends, you can make up to about 160. So the superintendent, that's for one classroom, for school term. However
Sure.
many months school term is, 9.5 months, whatever it is. Superintendent works 12 months a year. Superintendent gets about 3 times that amount, or 2.5. That again depends on where you are because we have a step schedule for the superintendent as well. So so anywhere from a little over double to what a teacher would make at the top, to maybe 2.6% times more than what a teacher makes. Now, a teacher's got one classroom, 24 kids, 30 kids, 35 kids, whatever the number is appropriate for that grade level in that subject. One classroom. A principal who makes more than a teacher has 20 classrooms, 30. A high school might have 100 plus classrooms. The superintendent makes more than the principal, but he's got thousands of classrooms and dozens of schools that he's responsible for. So I do not apologize for paying our superintendent and giving him a 2.5% raise like we gave everybody else. I don't disagree with that. I think it was the right thing to do. And it was a little more than 2.5 because there's some other little add-ons here and there, but roughly it rounds out to approximately 2.5. It was the right thing to do. And if you want to maintain that delta, that difference, to attract somebody who's willing to take the responsibility, not of one classroom, but thousands of classrooms, you got to pay a competitive wage. And he, by the way, is not the highest paid superintendent in the Bay Area. There's superintendents that make double what he makes. There's a superintendent with 1/3 the size district, who makes $17,000 a year more than he does.
$17,000 a year or a month?
A year.
A year.
Less.
Oh,
I'm sorry, more. Let me rephrase that. Our superintendent makes thousands less per year.
Gotcha.
Than a neighboring district who's about 25 minutes away.
That has a district
about a third our size.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Makes thousands more than our superintendent makes. So
that's okay.
And there's a superintendent over on the peninsula, that area, that side of the bay, who makes over $600,000 a year.
That's good money, and maybe I'm in the wrong business.
No, I know. I never got that. When I was in schools, I never had that kind of money as an administrator. Darn it, I was working in the wrong place.
Inflation. Okay, so let's get back to it. You were talking about getting kids back in school. Now, recently, there's been a lot of criticism of you for voting to continue distance learning until January.
Yep.
Why did you do that? Why not vote to have kids go back to school immediately?
Well, we couldn't go back immediately, first because under the county and state guidelines.
How about just before January?
Right.
Why not?
Well, right. Because the earliest we could go back was approximately October 19th. This is assuming we went to the red, which we did.
Great.
We went in the red last week. And so you count out the number of weeks. And then so October 19th, we would have been able to go back to hybrid, not 5 days a week, but it was social distancing and the number of kids you can have in a classroom at once.
But kids will be in the classroom.
That
will be on campus.
That was the recommendation from staff back when we applied for the waiver. So what is that now, a month and a half ago? But when it came down to it, they asked for an extension because they needed more time, negotiations with the unions on safety issues, health issues, and you don't want to. I don't want. That's not something that's small potatoes. You got to make sure that people feel comfortable with what is going to be expected of them working in a classroom with kids. So, what are the protocols when a child breaks protocol and goes and he's got snotty nose and he comes and gives a big giant hug to his teacher, it surprises her, and So what are the ramifications of that? What are the protocols you're supposed to do when somebody breaks the 4 to 6 foot distancing rule? And what do you do when a child, in the classroom refuses to put on a mask? What are you going to do from a social distancing perspective in the hallways? We all saw pictures in Georgia of the high school where the kids were running around without masks, and they were packed in those hallways like sardines. I mean,
Right.
where was, chicken of the sea sitting there doing, God. I mean, it was tighter than a sardine
bad.
can.
Right.
It was incredible. And then, strangely enough, a bunch of them got COVID. Gee,
my gosh.
how could that have happened? So you're not following social distancing rules. So bottom line is they asked for more time. They also
When you say they, who's they?
I'm sorry, district administration.
Okay, great.
So I was willing to give them a week or two additional time.
So now we're talking. You were saying, hey, I'll go to the end of October or early November.
Right.
Okay.
But when I raised that issue, I could get no other board member to second the idea.
Why does that matter?
They didn't agree. Well, I am board president. I am not God. I get one vote. So
even if you were saying, hey, early November, let's draw a line in the sand.
They were not willing. The rest of the board felt that they wanted to agree with staff's recommendation. And that's fine. Again, I don't think any of us are figuring out, let's make decisions that hurt kids. They made an honest assessment in their minds that honoring staff's recommendation to wait until January 5th was the better way to go. I didn't agree with that. I felt we had around 32% of us. We did a survey, around 32% of our group, and there were different groups that wanted different things. So the largest single group was a number 32% that said we want to go back ASAP. Not, we can go back yesterday if we can. We don't want to wait till January 5th. We had another group, smaller but significant, that said we want to go back, but we'll wait until January 5th.
Okay.
Okay. And there were issues with that. I felt, and I could buy waiting till January 5th for the high schoolers, and I said that for the secondary kids. I had a problem with the elementaries because one of the rationales was, well, you don't want them to lose their teacher in the middle of the semester. Well, they're going to lose their teacher anyway, probably, potentially, if you go back in January, because that group of kids that's in social distance learning, 24 kids or 30 kids, whatever, in that elementary classroom, they're going to potentially get broken up, because if we go back, you're going to have a percentage of those kids whose families have said, I don't want them to go back.
Oh, so half of the class might be able to say, hey, I don't want to come back January 5th.
Whatever that number. Could be a third of the class, could be half, could be 2/3 of the class.
So then you have to compress classes with
different teachers. You may have to.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So I understood why, from a secondary perspective, the kids in the middle of calculus semester, let's change teachers in the middle of the semester. No, I didn't think that was appropriate or fair for the secondary kids.
Sure.
For the elementary, you're going to have to, at some point, whether it's now or in January, they're going to have to, I said in the board meeting, rip the Band-Aid off at some point. It's got to happen. Why not do it now? Or within a couple of weeks after you finish negotiations on the effects of the health and the safety issues with the unions. I didn't get the support of the rest of my board. So at that point, that issue was off the table. In other words, what was on the table was staff's recommendation to do January 5th. I tried to alter that and see if I could get my fellow board members to agree to an earlier start date. I was unsuccessful in that. So could not even get a second to second my vote so we could have second my motion so we could have a vote.
Okay.
So at that point, the only thing on the table was January 5th, or stay home for the rest of the year.
Wait, why were those the only two options? So if you didn't vote for January 5th...
Then the current status quo remains, which is distance learning.
Until the end of the school year.
Right, unless we change it. So, yeah, I wanted to go back as soon as possible. Going back as soon as possible was not in the cards because I didn't have the support. What was on the table, and probably would have support, we had to figure out how the discussion would go, would be January 5th. So I could be either voted to remain in distance learning for the rest of the year, or I could vote for January 5th. And I picked the only option I had, because
Right.
I don't think staying home the rest of the year is an appropriate option. If we can provide a robust hybrid in-person experience on January 5th, I believe that will be better than a remote for most kids. Now, having said that, some interesting data came out of that survey. And it is both interesting and enlightening and somewhat heartening. A large percentage of people, not the majority, but around 30%, said, we're not coming back the rest of the year. If we have a choice, we're going to keep distance for the rest of the year.
And a large percentage of those are student families, or those
families.
are teachers?
Oh,
Okay.
no. Oh,
Those
no,
are
teachers were much, I'm talking families.
Okay, great.
Teachers were overwhelmingly in favor of staying out the rest of the year.
And then 30% of the student families said, hey, even if you give us an in-person hybrid,
We
whatever.
would prefer to do distance.
Gotcha.
And I have said from the very beginning, let me say this as clearly as I can. Distance learning will remain an option for all families that want it. I don't want there to be any misunderstandings about what I'm saying. Because I want kids back doesn't mean I don't want distance learning to still be out there for those families that want it. We need to provide two different, parallel, robust, and effective educational models for our kids. Those that want to come back and those that want to stay home. What was fascinating, given the rather poor performance in the spring, nobody did a good job.
Sure.
This district included did not do a good job in the spring with distance learning. It was a learning process. We figured out what worked, what didn't work. But what the families told us, the 30% that say they want to stay home, they're very happy with what we rolled out from a distance learning perspective, and they don't want to go back to in-person for a variety of reasons. One of them obviously is COVID. So are you putting your child at risk, at a greater risk, in the classroom with a bunch of other kids as opposed to staying home? I would argue it's a heightened risk, but it's a minimal risk based on what other states have shown. But you've got that. Then you have the issue of some people think we've done such a great job in distance learning that they think they'll get a better experience with 5 days of distance learning a week than a partial week in person and the rest of it distance. So,
Right, because how do I miss a word? How do I miss a word here? I'm drinking coffee. But the point is the mismatch, right? So you have part in person and part remote. That'll be too complex for the younger kids, and they like, look, let's just stay as consistent as possible.
And they like how it's going.
Gotcha.
And you have to give credit to where credit is due. Our principals, our teachers, our classified employees hit it out of the ballpark for many, many of our families. Does that mean 100% of the families thinks distance learning is great? No. I've also heard from parents that think it's not working for their child. It's horrible for their child. And that gets to the heart of that ultimately you have different learning modalities that kids have. And for them, for some kids, a screen experience simply doesn't cut it. They need that in-person, that auditory, visual, sensory experience that you get in an in-person experience that you simply do not get in a two-dimensional screen looking, that's in 6 inches in front of your face.
Gotcha.
So the bottom line is we need to offer both experiences for our kids because that is ultimately what our families have asked for. It's what our kids have asked for, and we need to provide that. And so one of the things we also have to do is, so to wrap that up, I don't want that to be diminished. Our staff did a phenomenal job, and such a good job that a significant portion of our families say, "Nah, we like distance learning. We're gonna keep it for the rest of the year." I think that's
commendable.
That's very commendable. I'm very pleased that's and you got to give credit where credit's due. My disagreement about the future of this district has nothing to do with my strong belief that we have some of the best teachers out there in the state of California, heck, in the country, because our test scores, our achievements, our proficiencies are college entrance, college acceptance rates, say it. And you got to give credit where credit's due. It's those people in the classrooms. It's those principals running those schools that have made us the great district that it is. So my disagreement isn't with the individual teachers. My disagreement about vision and where we need to head as a district is really with the union. And I've had a good relationship with the union in the past. I hope to have one again, assuming I get reelected. But the bottom line is, I'm always going to put, and reasonable people can agree to disagree reasonably. I'm always going to put kids first. And if what the union wants is not what, in my opinion, is in the best interest of kids, like giving them $40 million that we don't have, that would result in layoffs of teachers and other staff and a massive disruption and being taken over by the county. Is that good for kids? I'd say, heck no, that's not good for kids. So why would I agree to that? Right. Or deciding to stay home for the rest of the school year. I don't agree with CTA's position on that issue, and I can't support it because I don't think that's ultimately best for kids. But I also believe those families that want to stay home can. So my disagreement is not with the rank and file teachers out there who are doing a bang-up job every day. Congratulations, you're doing a heck of a job. My issue is, and it's not a life or death struggle. It's an issue of philosophy and vision about what's best for this district. My vision is the one I've explained, and I think that's best for kids. The teachers union has a different vision of what they think is best for the union. I'm always going to do what I think is best for kids.
Gotcha.
Period. And if people don't like that, that's what November's every 4 years are all about. So they can vote me out. The bottom line is, I think what we have here is a battle for the hearts and the minds and the future of what this district is going to look like. So I feel that strongly about it. Do you want a board that's beholden to the teachers union, not the teachers union, or do you want a board that's beholden to the students and the parents and the taxpayers? And very often, those are different conflicting imperatives. So what the teachers want and what's best for kids sometimes are at conflict. Are you able to find a way? What I've done in the last 20 years and 30 plus years as an administrator is I found a way to take what appear to be intractable, opposite issues and positions and found a way to find commonality and togetherness to solve a problem so that we find that sweet spot. So what ends up best for kids happens to also be best for teachers.
Right.
But when there comes an issue where you cannot find sufficient commonality, so you're either going to help the union or you're going to help the students, and there's not a way to make both happen on the same issue at the same time, I'm always going to side with the student. Sorry, that's what you're getting. And that's what you have with the current board. Now, my fellow board members, 3 of which are not up for election. But the bottom line is we're always going to try to do what's best for kids. And we want to do what's best for employees as well, because they're all stakeholders. Parents, kids, teachers, classified employees, administrators, the principals, the executive staff, all are the taxpayers. They're all stakeholders. And rarely do all of the issues for each stakeholder line up perfectly.
Right.
Where you can always say, oh, this is it for all of them. No. Right. You're almost always having to figure out what is that sweet spot so that you're doing the greatest good for the greatest number of your customers. And who are your customers? Your students and your parents.
Right.
Those are your customers. And so but you got other stakeholders. So how do you work all this out? It's a very complex issue. It's not a black and white issue. It isn't a yes or no issue. Right. And unfortunately, I think the way sometimes it's presented on social media, the way it's presented by the union sometimes in social media, is that if you don't agree with them, you're somehow the spawn of Satan. And I have to tell you, for 95% of the issues that have come before me as a board member in 20 years, I'm in complete agreement with the union on stuff. Right. But there are some things I simply cannot agree on, and if that is hurting the kids in order to get the support of the union's endorsement, I simply cannot and will not do that. Absolutely won't. So
Right. And I was actually speaking with a teacher just at the end of last week. The complexity, and I'll just say this and we'll move on, the complexity with even identifying what's best for teachers
Sure.
is it's very deep. For instance, we've lost, I'm sure, a certain number. I think I heard the number since COVID started, something like 1,600 kids from the district as a whole. And I could be wrong on that. Don't quote me. The point is, we've lost a certain number of families and students.
We have.
If we continue to go on the union's recommendation of, hey, let's stay distance learning until there are 0 cases of COVID, people argue, well, look, that's what's best for teachers. That's going to be safest. And that may be true. I don't know. But what I do know is we will likely lose even more students if that becomes our position. And what happens then is if that number of students is great enough, the budget that holds everything together is going to take an enormous hit. If we lost 3,000 or 4,000 students, you're talking about millions and millions of dollars.
Well, Lisa, we get a cost per student or a revenue stream per student, and it varies. On average, it's around 8,000.
Sure.
So, but the high schools, it's more. A high school student leaves us, it's a much larger hit than if a kindergartner leaves us, as an example. So, on average, it's around 8,000. So, depending on that mix, if for every 1,000 kids, we can lose between 8 to 10. Can I start over? If we lose 1,000 kids, we're going to lose around $8 to $10 million.
So if we lost 3,000 students, we'd be losing $24 to $30 million in the annual budget.
Yes, again, depends on where those kids are leaving from, what grade levels they're leaving us, and that's not a number you can recover from, and not have the district look sort of like it does today. So, and I absolutely understand the concern that the union has about safety, because I vehemently agree that safety is paramount. But I also believe that you have to take a realistic view of safety. When you leave the house every day, you're unsafe because you can get hit by a car. You could get there was a guy a number of years ago he was in his car and he got hit by a meteor. Right? I mean, just came down.
Probably not an event you make policy on, but your point is well taken.
Right.
There's an inherent risk.
You simply don't know. You could stay home and have a carbon monoxide buildup because there's a problem with your gas water heater, and your house fills up with carbon monoxide. So life is not 100% risk free. So, and some people get upset when I say that, but that's the reality. So, what do you do to mitigate the risk that brings it down to an acceptable level? Can we get rid of 100% of the risk related to COVID? And the answer is no.
Gotcha.
Anybody who tells you that is lying through their teeth.
Gotcha.
They're lying through their teeth.
Gotcha.
No, it is absolutely going to remain a risk. I talked to 2 MDs last week who are parents here in the district, and one of them is heavily in research in pandemics. That's what she does at her university. They said to me, COVID's here for us for the rest of our lives. It's going to be like the common cold and the flu. It's going to happen. We're not getting it out. It's gone. It's not going to be gone.
You can't park that car back in the garage.
No. So the question is, how do we deal with it, and how do we deal with it effectively? So, is COVID going to be here with us for a long time? According to these doctors, they are. To the other things I've read, yes, it'll be here for a while. So what do? You cannot make it 100% safe. You can make it as close, reasonably to 100% as possible. And so with social distancing, with the masks, with sanitation, wiping everything down constantly, strict adherence to the rules. I was reading an article about what's going on in Florida. The schools there opened in early August. They're far ahead of California in dealing with the COVID mess. And what they've done in some fairly large, and we were talking 200,000 kids in some districts, so they have county-wide districts in Florida. What they're doing is it's almost like a military precision. I don't know if that would fly in California, but it's Florida. So literally, you violate the mask rule, you're suspended and sent home. You are not within the appropriate distance between you and others in the hallway or in a classroom, boom, you're sent home. So I mean, it's like military justice, swift and sure. It's done. No, well, hopefully little Johnny will learn next time. It is. You're gone. Now, what's happened? What is the result of that? They're telling me that Florida is continuing to see a reduction in COVID infections in school-age kids. School-age kids. Now, let's talk college and university kids. It's out of control. It's a pandemic big time there, because what's a ninth grader going to do that first time? They're going to that kegger party at the fraternity.
Oh, you mean freshman, not a ninth grader.
Did I say ninth grader? Yeah. Oh, God. I'm sorry.
What kind of high school did you go to,
I've been out of higher ed too long. Sorry about that. Freshman.
Yeah, right.
Freshman in college.
Right. I get texts and phone calls
because they all think they're made of rubber. They all think
Right.
they're made of rubber.
Right.
So the reality is in the college scene in Florida, things are not in good shape. At the K-12 scene, because they've taken a very strict
right, you can control
protocols.
a 15 and 16-year-old if you're seeing them. I mean, they're not sleeping at the high school. They go home, or then when you're in college, you obviously leave the campus and you go do whatever you do. But
right, so so there are things that are working, and I would say to my fellow board members, when we get to this point when we're being brought with the final protocols that have been agreed to with the union from a safety perspective. What is that? Is that a strict adherence? Are we going to do, because it's working in Florida, do we want to do that? Are we going to be pretty laissez-faire about it here in San Ramon Valley? I'd argue we need to be pretty as strict as we can, within reason, recognizing that we have some kids. It doesn't matter what you tell them. They're special need kids. They don't understand. There's a lot of things. So it's not. This is not a cookie cutter.
Right.
Situation.
You need people to be willing to participate in the solution.
Right. So we got to figure out and we need to recognize that some of our staff, our teachers, our classified employees, our administrators, some of them have comorbidity issues that they need to deal with. So if you're overweight, if you have diabetes, if you have a heart condition, you have asthma, you have COPD, the list is sadly
on and on, yeah.
sadly a long one. But if you have those comorbidity issues, so you have a higher risk. Well, I don't want, and the rest of the board doesn't want to put them at a needless risk. So for them, it might be appropriate for them to be one of the teachers who does full-time distance learning. So there's a process that the law requires we go through when a staff member submits a medical, excuse that they can't perform their normal duties, and they want an accommodation. So that process, that interactive process, as it's called, is continuing as we speak to find out who is ultimately going to be available to teach in person and who's going to teach distance or a combination because it's hybrid.
Gotcha.
And that's, again, part of the problem is people don't want to lose their teacher. Well, if their teacher was working with 30 kids in a distance learning environment, but they have one of those comorbidity issues, or maybe they have family members that are highly susceptible that they go home to every night. So we give them a reason to then we give them an excuse, if you will, to be in distance learning environment. Well, they're not going to have the same kids because most kids are going to go back to in person. Mm-hmm. So she's not going to have 7 kids. We're going to have to bunch them up. We don't have enough teachers to say every teacher is only going to have 7 or 8 kids. Right. No, we've got to reshuffle the apple cart so that we get the right number of apples, if you will, with that teacher. Apples, the teachers, that's an appropriate term. So you're going to mix those together so that it's appropriate. So that teacher who was teaching a whole 30 kids, maybe half of her kids or 2/3 of her kids are going to be now in person. She can't do it. Obviously, there's another teacher involved.
Sure.
It's just the only way to do it. So I understand all the reasons why staff said we need more time to figure all that out, and we need more time to finish negotiations with the union. I just felt if we all pitched in together, we could do this in a week or two.
If you really put your heads together,
I thought we could. Staff didn't agree with me. My fellow board members didn't agree, and so the only choice I had was January 5th or stay home the rest of the year. Gotcha. So I went with January 5th. That was a long, short sentence, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Short explanation.
Greg, look, I'm going to let you go. Thank you for hitting these. I know these were not the...
Were there any others? Can we do them like in 1 minute?
Yes, I did have one question. Marin, How did they do it? They're going back to school. There's a district in Marin that's going back to school, unless I'm mistaken. There was I actually emailed the superintendent recently to ask if she'd do an interview. What do you think would have to happen in the San Ramon Valley Unified?
Are they going back hybrid, or are they going back full 5 day a week?
Okay, that's a very valid question. They will have kids on campus in some capacity.
Mm-hmm.
What would have to happen here? And I know if you had a magic wand, what would happen here that would make that come to pass in the San Ramon Valley?
Other than the calendar of January 5th hitting?
Yeah, other than that.
Other than that. Well, we'd have to understand why. I mean, my goal would be to have everybody back 5 days a week. If we could pull that off. So one of the things I've asked staff is, I need to know if we're going to go half and half, so basically half the class in one cohort and half the class in the other. Are we going to do what is better for kids? Is it going to school in like AM? So 5 days a week, you have an AM class you're going to. Mm-hmm. PM, we're talking elementary now. So PM, you have another cohort that goes in the afternoons. Is that better for kids as opposed to doing a hybrid for 2 days? I would argue it probably is, but what I asked for is I need literature. I need data.
We need evidence. We need something.
Right. But, and as the superintendent pointed out, it's too early to say that there's a peer-reviewed journal article that says this, because this is also new. I said, but I am confident that there are experts out there who will opine on just about anything, and these are people knowledgeable. What do they think would be better for kids? Would it be a hybrid in the sense that you're going in the AM 5 days a week, so it's as close to a 5 day a week experience as you can get in the COVID world that we live in now? Or would you do like 2 days, 1 week, 3 days the next? So it's basically half time in person and the other half distance learning.
So you would want to pick one of those models as best we could.
Right. So staff can then, so then we can then ask the parents, here's the model that we have for you.
Would you like it, or would you like to stay?
Right. What is it? And so I got beat up by some people because, you should have given us a choice in July. Well, we didn't know in July what the situation would look like in the fall. Right. We also didn't know what the county was going to do to us, because the county has changed the criteria 5 or 6 times.
And
by
they
the
continue.
way.
The
and
state
they
continues to change it.
Changed it today. Have you heard the latest?
No.
Oh yes.
No. What's
this?
this?
Yes. You ready for this, guys? Here it goes. So the governor has decided that a county cannot move from one tier to the next. In other words, a lower tier to a less restrictive tier. It has to be every community in the county has to be at that level or below. So if 90% of the cities in Contra Costa County, or 95% of the cities in Contra Costa County could go from the red to the orange, but one city or 2 cities aren't, you can't go as a county. That just was announced today. And it was vehemently opposed by the counties and cities, and the governor, bless his heart, decided that not this one, for equity purposes. For equity purposes was the reason. So I disagree with that vehemently. San Ramon Valley has some of the lowest COVID infection rates in the county. There are some cities that not faring well at all. Countywide, statistically, on average, we were low enough that we could go from purple to red. It looks like it will be a long time before we move from red to yellow under this. And those counties that are still in the purple means those districts that are in those counties will not be able to go back to any sort of in-person hybrid method without a waiver. And they, if they're like Contra Costa County Health, they won't get a waiver. They will not get granted a waiver. So if you're in the purple now under the new rules as of today, it will be very difficult to get into the red. If one community, you may have 100 different cities and towns in a county.
Sure.
If one of them is above the level to get into the red, you won't be able to leave as a county. You won't be able to leave purple. You can have 2,000 people and 1.5 million are in good shape. Doesn't matter. If that community is below the number. And I just got this from the county today. I was in a meeting at noon and was told this by a high official at the county, that this had just been announced.
Oh, God, man, every time we seem to get our
Right.
footing.
So
Every
July,
time. Yeah.
could we have offered somebody? Because I know there's Palo Alto tried that.
Right.
They tried it. They said, hey, everybody, you're going to make a decision in July. Well, what are we getting? What are we going to get choice of? I don't know. We haven't figured that out yet. But you make a decision now. No. And they got beat up big time. They had to back off. We knew better. We said, no, we're not going to have you commit to a model of what you want for your child until you know what that model is.
Right.
To me, that seems fair. It seems equitable. Because when you make that decision, you don't get to change that decision the following week, the following 2 weeks. I changed my mind. I want to go back to distance learning. No. Or I want to go from distance learning back to in-person. No, can't do that for a huge number of reasons, primarily staffing. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. Putting all the puzzles together to make it all work requires you knowing what your known universe is of what people want.
Sure.
And
you can't make them pick between something.
Right. So if thousands of families decide to change their mind again, after we've said this is the deadline, make a decision, we can't do that. It's impossible. As much as I would love to give that kind of flexibility, the reality is it's impossible. It's like I want that giant mansion, the 35,000 square foot mansion up there. Yeah, that's a reality. Not going to happen for me. So it's the same thing. So the bottom line is, as soon as staff has made their finishing touches with the unions on the protocols that are agreed upon from those things that are negotiable, not the decision to open, that's our decision, but the protocols, the impacts of that on the unions. So it's classified and certificated. At that point, that's settled. Then the board will meet, and the board will authorize going out to making a choice. Then the parents will make that, and they'll have a reasonable time, 2-3 minutes.
Gotcha.
That was a joke. They'll have a reasonable amount of time to make a decision, because we have to do it early enough that the January 5th date is now live. And I've told the superintendent, you just need to know, I will want to be on another planet, far, far away, on January 5th if this district is not providing in-person instruction. I don't know whether I'll have any say, because again, after November, but assuming I'm still on the board, I will not be happy. And again, it is not an either or kind of situation. If you are unable to want to have your child in person, distance learning will be available full-time for the rest of the year in as robust and effective a way as we provided prior, when everybody was distance. So it isn't an either or. Those that want to go back, right now the only people who are benefiting in terms of in this debate are those that want to stay distance. So I'm hoping then by January 5th, those in the debate that would like to have an in-person experience will be able to have that as well. So we'll do the best we can in the difficult situation. So
Gotcha.
All of this is sort of on my website, if I may.
We've been speaking for an hour, 12 minutes. You have this lined up.
www.reelectmarvel.com.
I love it.
Yeah, so I think I want to thank you for having me. I want to thank people for listening. We could talk for many, many hours about it, because there's so many things we haven't touched. Oh, PSATs.
Oh,
SAT and PSATs. So I was successful in pushing this issue. SATs, of course, I think it's already been announced. We're going to be sponsoring SATs here at our in the district, so people aren't going to have the horror stories of having to travel to Nevada and Oregon or wherever the heck they were having to go. No, we're doing it here. And tomorrow night we'll be getting a report from staff. I was pushing for not just PSATs for 11th graders, but PSATs sponsored by the district for 10th graders as well. We had done that previously. The recommendation was to not do it for sophomores if we still had distance social distancing rules in place, and I screamed bloody murder about that. So I believe we're going to see on Tuesday a proposal that will allow both sophomore and junior PSATs to be offered as well.
Well, I sure hope we see that. I know that all the families I work with appreciate those.
Oh, it's the
sophomore
right thing to do
PSATs,
because study after study after study has shown that SAT scores go up when you've taken practice tests, and
Right.
That's obviously what the PSATs are. And people say, well, what are SATs are meaningless now because of UC and Cal State. No, they're not. They're not meaningless, and they are a small subset of the university world, college universities out there, and NCAA still expects.
Right. Even within those, you can't guarantee that you won't need.
Right. You need to take them. So we've had that discussion in the prior blog about my position on SATs. But the bottom line is they're still needed. We need to provide access to it, and we need to provide the practice tests. So good news.
Wonderful.
I should be coming at Tuesday night's board meeting tomorrow night at 7 p.m.
Everybody tune in.
Live screened, live streamed.
It'll be beautiful. Well, again, thank you very much, Greg. I appreciate it. Thanks for your time, and good luck with the ballots.
Thank you.